Hello, I'm Seth Peacock. Today I'm going to show you a few things about indexing. Let's start by going to indexing, web indexing. You could also go to find a project, but I prefer this web indexing page. We'll click on find batches and we see here a variety of projects with differing difficulty levels. We can filter those levels by clicking on these over here. We can change the language by clicking on here. We can change how they're arranged, how they're sorted, and we can also change the number of batches we check out. I'm going to do this Canada immigration ocean arrivals. We see here a text box. It's giving us some general advice, but in other projects it may give some more specific details, so I'd recommend reading the text box before you begin. We'll start by reading the project instructions. If they're not already showing up, you can click on this icon or go to help and then project instructions. You'll want to make sure to read through the whole thing. Since they differ from project to project, I'm not going to read this line by line, but I do want to illustrate some things that I think will be more easily understood if I show them rather than if you were just to read them. So when we have these reference images, they give some idea of how to index these documents. So if you're kind of confused, those can be helpful. Another thing that's helpful is to click on these question marks, the field helps, and that can give you some idea of what they're looking for in that particular field. Second is the general guidelines. These guidelines apply to most projects. Sometimes they do change. The changes I would look out for, if there are going to be any changes, the most significant ones would be the names. Do they want you to expand the names? Do they want you not to expand it or not to correct it? In most cases, they're going to say no, do not correct or expand. But sometimes with place names, they say expand the name. Another point in these instructions is handwriting. You can click on that pen here and that will bring up a reference. That might not be super helpful, but you can also click there and there's more examples. Those are Old English examples. At least that's how they are right now. If neither of those seem very helpful, something that I find helpful in all cases is to compare the Scribes writing to the other writings on the page. So if there's one particular word I'm struggling with or a particular letter, I look at the other writing on the page and try to ascertain what that letter is. It's like, how do they do their E's? Okay, that's what their E's look like. That's what A's look like. That's what their K's look like. That's what their F's look like. There are instances where it seems like kind of random. It might seem kind of random how they write a certain letter, and so comparing it to other words on the page in which you can tell what the word is and thereby deduct what the letter is supposed to be, you can then use that and apply that to other situations where it's not so clear what the word is supposed to be, what the spelling is supposed to be. So that can be a useful thing, especially if the writer is the same for multiple documents. Then you can look at multiple documents and get familiar with that person's handwriting. The last of these project instructions I want to cover is what to do when record spans 2 images or to view additional images. Such a situation is not very common, but it does happen sometimes. What you want to do is to enter all the information on the first image and then leave the second part of it, the second image, blank. So not splitting the information. So for example, if there was like a front side and a back side and it was all related to one person, not two separate people, but all one person, and what you would do is type all that information all in the one entry, including the stuff from the second image. So if this was an example of that, what I would do is I could open up this reference image and I could look at the second image while having the first one open, and so I can fill out that information and I don't have to switch back and forth between the images. I could also use these reference images for checking handwriting, and if a record does span images and my batch starts with the second part, I wouldn't index that. But if the final image is the first part and I don't have the second part, then I would go to this reference images and I could see what the second part is. All right, and now I want to cover a few of the layout things and the tools FamilySearch has. I won't do all of them, of course, but the ones I think are most helpful. You can change the data entry here. I prefer form most of the time, and then column entry for things like census records or other type of records where it's kind of a grid layout. There might be a list of names and then information going across. That's why I'd prefer such a thing, because then you can, because I find it easier to read down than try to like follow it across and make sure I'm not missing any information. I also find it easier because in those situations there's often repeat information. So if it was like a census, for example, there might be an entry where you have to say what is the census year, and it would be the same year for everyone. So I could enter it in here, and after having done that, I could click on this, which copies the text from this box and puts it in the rest of them, and so I don't have to type that again. I could also, if it just follows the next one, so if there were several people with the same name, for example, but not everybody on that in the census had the same last name, I could just do this, and that would copy from the last one. It wouldn't put it into every single one afterwards. That reduces a bit of typing. But you can also use these tools if you are in format entry. And now, since I've added some entries, more than I'll need, I can show you something else. We can delete the extra entries by clicking on this trash can. I can delete just one by doing the current entry, or I could delete all the blank ones. That's especially helpful if FamilySearch by default adds a bunch of entries. For example, on like a census, it might give you like 40 blank entries, and it's like there's only 10 people on this record. And so what I would do after is I would type in all the information for the people, and then after that, I would delete all the blank entries. And so I'd just be left with the 10. You could also just start off and delete all the extra entries and add them as needed. Another helpful tool is the ruler. Another example, and the ruler works better on this example. You'd open up by clicking here, and then we have the ruler. I find this tool helps me not enter information for the wrong person. So say I wasn't being super careful when I was reading across, and I was like, oh, well, these numbers, they might go to like that person. And this example is pretty easy to follow without the ruler, but there's other cases in which it's definitely helpful to have that ruler. And so that's something to keep in mind. And now that I've covered some of those tools and baseline instructions, I'm going to index these records. I'm not going to do that step by step. I'm just going to type it out, and then I'll make some comments afterward. All right, and now I'm done. So just a few closing comments. I was having trouble with this place name. I mean, not a ton of trouble, but this part of the word wasn't showing up. And so what I did was I searched Tompkins in Canada, and then it was like, oh, it's in Saskatchewan. And so I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. That looks like it could be a shortened version of Saskatchewan. And in this project, they want me to expand it. So that's partially what I was looking for. There was also another one where it was kind of hard to read. And I did a similar thing where I was looking at locations within Holland or the Netherlands and seeing if that made sense. One of the places that you can search that is Google, but you could also go to FamilySearch to the places. The way you would do that is go all the way down to the bottom of a page, go to sitemap, and then places. The way I was doing it for the Netherlands was I searched Netherlands and then do places within. This gives you a lot of pages to look through, but you can kind of skip ahead and be like, well, it started with this letter, so maybe it's farther that way, or it's not that far, it's much closer. But that's one way you can do it. You can look through these locations, and if any of the names seem to match, that might give you an idea. But it's also possible that the person just misspelled the name of the place. That happens as well. So unless you're told to correct, don't correct it. So those are a few remarks. Just one last quick thing is you can rearrange the order these boxes come in. So if you find these inconvenient, most of the time I find them pretty convenient, but if they are inconvenient, you can rearrange them. And having filled out all the relevant information, I'll submit batch. Once I've done that, it will now go to somebody to be reviewed. The reviewer will check my work. They'll look through and verify that I was entering the information correctly, add some security to make sure that this information is being put in correctly. Now, there can be mistakes that pass through, and it's not an invitation to just be careless, but there is some reassurance that it's like, okay, somebody else is going to be looking at this, and so you don't have to be super worried. But if you are finding something too difficult to read, or you're just not understanding the document, I'd recommend returning the batch and finding another project. As you index, you'll become a bit more familiar with things. And as you look at examples, you could look at examples of index records, you can do that through like family searches, looking through the documents, and I could show that in a different video. But doing that, you can look at how other similar documents have been indexed, and so that might also give you an idea of how to index something if you're facing difficulty with how to do that. And that's all I have for this video. I wish you luck in your efforts, and bye-bye.